Draco and his friends were sitting in the Slytherin common room, lounging on the comfortable couches and armchairs surrounding the crackling fireplace. The room was dimly lit, casting shadows across their faces as they engaged in conversation. Crabby and Goyle were laughing loudly at some crude joke, their voices booming through the room. Draco, however, was uncharacteristically quiet, lost in thought as he stared into the fire.
Blaise Zabini, noticing Draco's unusual silence, nudged him gently. "What's got you so lost in thought, mate?"
Zabini's question snapped Draco back to reality, and he quickly shifted his gaze away from the fire. "Nothing," he muttered, his voice distant.
Zabini raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying Draco's dismissive response. "Don't give me that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've been all broody and quiet since potions class. What's going on?"
Draco sighed, realizing that Zabini wasn't going to drop the subject. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual arrogance replaced by a hint of vulnerability. "It's complicated," he muttered, his voice quieter than usual. "It's about that new girl, Snape's daughter."
Zabini raised his eyebrows in surprise, his eyes widening slightly. "Oh, I see," he said, a smirk forming on his face. "I should have known. You've been obsessed with her since the moment you laid eyes on her."
Draco glared at Zabini, annoyed by his obvious enjoyment of the situation.
Blaise leaned forward, a knowing smile on his face. "I saw you trying to talk to her during potions class," he said, his tone teasing. You couldn't take your eyes off her."
"I was just trying to help her," Draco snapped defensively.
"Sure, that's what it was," he said sarcastically. "You were just being nice, huh?"
"Shut up," Draco repeated, his cheeks slightly flushed in embarrassment. "I was just trying to be helpful, that's all."
Zabini chuckled, enjoying seeing Draco get a little flustered. "Oh, and I bet you're just dying to know where she is right now, huh?" he asked, his tone suggestive.
Draco's cheeks flushed even redder at Zabini's words, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. "No, I'm not," he snapped, his voice betraying his earlier confidence. "I don't care where she is."
Despite Draco's denial, Zabini saw right through him. "You're such a terrible liar," he chuckled, shaking his head in amusement. "You're practically obsessed with her. Admit it."
"I am not," Draco snapped, his denial a little too quick. "She's just interesting, that's all."
"Interesting, huh?" Zabini said, his smirk growing wider. "Is that what you call it? You can't stop staring at her, and you're getting all flustered just talking about her. Sounds like obsession to me."
"Shut up," Draco repeated, his irritation growing. "You don't know what you're talking about."
Zabini chuckled at Draco's frustration, clearly enjoying messing with him. "Too bad I know where she is right now," he said, a sly smile on his face.
Draco's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and curiosity in his expression. He couldn't help but be intrigued by Zabini's words. "You do?" he asked, his voice betraying his eagerness.
"Yep," he said casually. "I overheard Riddle telling her where she'll be patrolling tonight. It seems like her prefect duties are quite important."
Draco's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the news. "They have her patrolling already?"
"Yeah, she's pretty serious about her duties," Zabini replied with a shrug. "Seems like she takes her role as a prefect seriously."
"Of course she does," he said with a sigh. "She's Snape's daughter. She's probably been trained to be the perfect student since birth."
"Well, it seems like it's paying off for her," Zabini pointed out, a smirk on his face. She's definitely making a name for herself, whether you like it or not."
Draco couldn't hide his curiosity any longer. "All right, enough chit-chat," he said, his tone more urgent now. "Where is she patrolling right now?"
Zabini chuckled at Draco's obvious desperation to know your whereabouts. "Someone's eager to see her," he teased, a smirk on his face.
"Shut up," Draco growled, his patience wearing thin. "Just tell me where she is."
Zabini chuckled, enjoying messing with Draco. "You do realize that if you go out looking for her, you'll get into trouble for being out after curfew, right?" he said, his tone both teasing and mocking. "And who knows what she might do if she catches you."
Draco's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "I don't care if I get into trouble," he said firmly. "And I certainly wouldn't mind being caught by her."
"Oh, really?" Zabini snickered at Draco's admission, clearly enjoying the situation. "You have a thing for getting in trouble, huh? And for her too, it seems."
Draco's smirk widened as he thought about the idea. "I wouldn't mind a little detention with her," he said.
Zabini gave Draco an appreciative nod, acknowledging his courage. "You have some guts, I'll give you that," he said, a trace of respect in his voice. Going up against her takes a certain kind of audacity.
You think I can't handle her?
"Oh, I don't doubt your ability to handle yourself," he said, his smirk widening. "But you're talking about Snape's daughter here. She's not someone to be trifled with."
Draco, having made up his mind, stood up and stretched. "All right, enough talk," he said, his gaze determined. "Where is she patrolling tonight?"
Blaise chuckled and smirked at Draco's determination. He leaned back in his chair, taking his time before answering. "Well, I heard she's patrolling the third-floor corridor tonight," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Apparently, it's a pretty quiet area."
Draco took a deep breath, steeling himself for his plan. "I'm going to take a little walk now," he said, trying to sound casual, but his heart was pounding with anticipation.
Blaise chuckled, entertained by Draco's attempt at nonchalance. "A little walk, huh?" he said, his smirk growing wider. "You mean to say you're going to try to find her?"
Draco smirked, his resolve strengthened. "Let's just say I'm going for a little stroll in the third-floor corridor."
"A little stroll, huh? Just hoping to run into her, I suppose," he teased.
Draco walked over to the door, his mind focused on his mission. "I'll be back in a bit," he said, his tone somewhat distracted as he opened the door.
"Don't get into too much trouble," he called out jokingly.
Draco slowly and quietly made his way through the hallways, his footsteps hushed and stealthy. He kept to the shadows, his eyes darting from side to side, constantly watching for any signs of teachers or other students patrolling. He could hear the occasional sound of voices or footsteps, but the castle seemed mostly quiet at this late hour. As he neared the third-floor corridor, he felt his heart rate increasing with anticipation. He knew he was risking getting in trouble, but the thought of potentially seeing you made the risk worth it. He quickened his pace, his eyes scanning the surroundings intently, searching for any signs of you patrolling. Finally, he reached the third-floor corridor. The area was indeed quiet, the only sounds coming from the occasional creaking of the castle walls and the soft rustling of the moonlight through the windows. Draco took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing of his heart. He looked around cautiously, hoping to catch a glimpse of you.
Suddenly, Tom Riddle appeared from the shadows, seemingly out of nowhere. "Who goes there? Who is it?" he demanded, his voice stern and suspicious.
Draco's heart skipped a beat as he recognized Riddle's voice. He quickly turned around, his eyes wide with surprise. "It's me. It's just me," he said, trying to sound composed despite the unexpected encounter.
Riddle stepped closer, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What are you doing out of your dorm so late? You know the rules. Students are supposed to be in their common rooms after hours."
Draco's eyes widened as he heard your voice. He turned around to see you walking towards them.
Riddle turned to look at you, his expression slightly surprised. "You sure?" he asked. Riddle raised an eyebrow, looking curiously at you. "Very well. I'll let you handle it," he said, stepping back and letting you take charge. Riddle turned his gaze to Draco, and realization dawned on his face as he pieced together the reason behind Draco's late-night wanderings. As Riddle walked off, shaking his head in amusement, he let out a chuckle and muttered something under his breath. "You've got guts, kid," he said, a smirk on his face.
As Riddle walked away, Draco turned to face you. He gulped, feeling nervous and a little intimidated by your authoritative demeanor. So he echoed softly, his voice betraying his nervousness. Draco's eyes widened slightly at the question. I was just taking a walk," he stammered, trying to come up with a believable excuse. Draco could feel your gaze scanning up and down his body, and he swallowed hard. I know," he said, his voice shaky. I couldn't sleep, and I needed some fresh air." Draco fidgeted under your gaze, feeling incredibly uneasy. He couldn't quite tell if you believed his excuse or not, and the suspense was killing him. Draco's heart skipped a beat as he heard you mention detention. He knew that getting caught out of his common room after hours warranted punishment, but a part of him was silently rejoicing at the prospect of spending more time with you. Detention, huh? He said, trying to sound unaffected despite the excitement bubbling up inside him. Draco's heart raced at your command. He nodded and eagerly followed after you, falling into step beside you as you walked back towards the slithering common room. Draco couldn't help but chuckle at your remark. You think so? He asked, a cheeky tone in his voice. Maybe I am a little crazy, but then again, isn't that what makes life interesting? Despite your eye roll, Draco couldn't help but smirk. Oh, come on, he teased, trying to get a rise out of you. Admit it, you kind of like that. I'm a little bit crazy. You're no fun, Draco said, feigning disappointment. I was hoping for at least a little bit of a reaction, but you're like a stone wall. Draco chuckled at your firm response. Oh, I like a challenge, he said, a sly smile spreading across his face. And trust me, I'm pretty good at getting past stone walls. Draco noticed your confused expression and chuckled softly at your apparent lack of direction. Trouble finding your way around, huh? He asked teasingly. Seems like you need my help after all. Draco smirked, amused by your sudden vulnerability. Ah, so you're lost, huh? He teased. Don't worry, I'll be your personal GPS for tonight, sweetheart. Draco's smirk was quickly wiped off his face as you abruptly pulled out your wand and cast a spell, magically binding his hands together. His eyes widened with surprise, and he struggled for a moment against the enchanted rope. Hey, what the hell? He protested, his tone now more annoyed than amused. What the hell are you doing, tying me up like this? Draco rolled his eyes, a smirk creeping back onto his face. Oh, so you're worried I might just leave you stranded here all alone, he teased. How very kind of you. Draco knew he could easily undo the spell if he wanted to, but there was something oddly thrilling about being bound at your mercy. He decided to play along. Draco had a mischievous gleam in his eyes as he realized the perfect opportunity to mess with you. Sure, I'll lead the way, he said casually. But you know, there's a few shortcuts we could take. Just to make sure we don't get caught, of course. He knew the true route to the slithering common room, but he couldn't resist toying with you a bit longer. Draco chuckled at your question, a mischievous glint in his eye. Caught doing what, you ask? He echoed, enjoying the opportunity to play with your words. Well, what do you think someone will think if they see you walking around with me tied up like this? Punishment, you say? He chuckled, enjoying every moment of this. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but that's not exactly what I was thinking. All right, he said, holding up his bound hands in mock surrender. I'll hurry up, but I have a feeling you kind of like having me all tied up like this. Draco's smirk widened as you pulled his arms closer, the distance between you now significantly reduced. He tried to maintain a cool demeanor, but there was a subtle hint of excitement and anticipation in his gaze. Stop what? He asked innocently, his voice taking on a softer tone. I haven't even done anything. Draco couldn't look away as he stared into your intense gaze, his breath catching in his throat. The closeness between you made his heart race, and he felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. You're, getting pretty close, he managed to say, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Draco stumbled backward from your unexpected push, a mix of surprise and amusement flickering across his features. He caught his balance and let out a playful scoff. All right, I'm walking, he said jokingly. No need to get handsy with me, darling. Draco walked ahead of you, his tall form towering over your figure. He could feel your presence behind him, and a strange sense of satisfaction filled him the longer you stayed close. As they walked, Draco glanced back at you every so often, his eyes lingering on your figure. There was something intriguing about having you so close behind him, like an irresistible force he couldn't quite ignore. Draco turned back as he noticed you halting, a playful smirk on his face. "Are you doubting my navigational skills, sweetheart?" he asked, feigning offense. "I haven't gotten us lost yet." Draco noticed the uncertainty in your expression, and his smirk softened slightly. He chuckled. "Scared of the dark, are we?" Draco watched as you took out your wand and whispered the Lumos spell, the tip of the wand illuminating the corridor in a soft glow. The light danced across your features, casting shadows on your face. The corridor was dimly lit by your wand, casting eerie shadows on the walls as you and Draco walked side by side. The darkness seemed to close in around you, making the space feel more intimate. As you heard the strange noise, your hand instinctively reached out and gripped his arm tightly. Draco felt your hand on his forearm, the pressure of your touch sending a shiver down his spine. Draco's ears perked up as you whispered about the noise. He strained his senses, trying to pinpoint where the sound had come from. "I don't know," he whispered back, his voice barely above a murmur. "But stay close." Draco smirked at your eye roll, amused at your attempt to downplay your fear. He could sense the hesitance in your step, despite your bravado. Feeling your grip on his arm tighten, he couldn't suppress a small grin. He pretended to struggle against your grasp, teasingly, accidentally bumping into you. Draco chuckled softly, his voice barely audible. "You know, it would be a lot less difficult if you just untied me," he whispered, a hint of playfulness in his voice. Draco leaned in, his voice even lower, as he added, "Besides, you could use someone with strong arms like mine to protect you in case something decides to jump out of the shadows." Draco's smirk deepened at your threat, his gaze locked on your face. My, someone's feisty tonight," he replied teasingly. As you walked down the hallway, the light from the wand cast long shadows on the walls, creating a strange and almost eerie atmosphere. Eventually, the path split into two different directions. Draco stopped in his tracks, looking back and forth, unsure which route to choose. Draco studied the two paths, his gaze flicking back and forth between them. After a moment of deliberation, he pointed to the path on the left. "Let's try this way," he whispered back, his voice barely above a murmur. Draco snickered softly, rolling his eyes at your sarcastic comment. "Oh, ha ha," he whispered back, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, I do go here. I just enjoy taking the scenic route." Draco chuckled softly, shaking his head. "A bit of both, I suppose," he admitted, his voice low. "The fear does add a certain atmosphere, doesn't it?" As you turned off your wand, the light at the end of the corridor grew closer, signaling the end of the dark passage. The air felt lighter as you walked, the ominous atmosphere starting to fade away. A strange noise suddenly echoed through the corridor, causing you to instinctively pull Draco and hide behind a pillar, your heart pounding in your chest. He stumbled slightly as you pulled him, but quickly regained his balance, his hands still bound together. As you stood behind the pillar, your back against the stone wall, Draco stumbled and ended up pressed against you. Caught off guard by the unexpected collision, he found himself towering over you, his body pinning you against the pillar. The closeness between you made his heart race, his face mere inches from yours. Draco's eyes locked with yours, his gaze intense as he noticed your gaze directed towards his hands. With a smirk, he whispered, "As much as I do enjoy being tied up by you, sweetheart, you might want to consider freeing me now. It would be quite helpful in this situation." With a swift motion of your wand, Draco felt the spell binding his hands together loosen, freeing him from his restraint. He shook off the remnants of the spell, quickly rubbing his wrists to soothe any lingering sensations. Draco pulled out his wand, his expression turning serious as he stepped out from behind the pillar. He muttered under his breath, "All right, let's see what's roaming around here at this late hour." Draco cautiously approached the corner, wand held at the ready. The light from his wand illuminated the corner of the corridor, revealing a few small mice scurrying around. He couldn't help but chuckle lightly as he realized they were the source of the noise. Draco walked back to where you were hiding, his expression relaxed. "It's all right," he said, his voice quiet but confident. "It's just a few mice. You can come out now." As you slowly stepped out from behind the pillar, Draco extended his hand towards you, a hint of a smile on his face. "Come on, it's safe now," he said, gesturing for you to take his hand. You cautiously gripped Draco's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin as he held your hand tightly in his own. He gently pulled you closer, your bodies now connected as you continued walking down the corridor. As you reached the entrance to the Slytherin common room, Draco held you close, his hand still firmly holding yours. The dim light cast shadows across his face, making him seem even more mysterious and charming. Draco's grip loosened as you withdrew your hand, a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice unusually tender. The loss of contact between your hands felt strangely empty to him. As he watched your hesitation, Draco couldn't help but smile. He gently tilted your chin up, his gaze filled with a soft understanding. "No more detention," he replied, his voice gentle. "I must admit, I didn't expect any of this from you." Draco chuckled softly, flashing a charming smile. "I was happy to help a lady in distress," he replied, his tone teasing. "After all, what kind of gentleman would I be if I left a damsel alone in the dark?" Draco chuckled softly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Though, I must admit, it wasn't entirely by choice," he said, a hint of playfulness in his tone. "Given the whole tied-up hands situation and all." Draco smirked, an amused expression on his face. "It's rather intriguing how you even know how to cast that spell to begin with," he said, his eyes glinting mischievously. Draco raised an eyebrow as he noticed your reaction. "Ah, that eye roll," he said with a smirk, clearly enjoying the moment. "You're trying so hard not to laugh, aren't you?" Draco chuckled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Yeah, it's already past midnight," he said, feigning exhaustion. "I suppose I should be getting back to my dorm. But hey, you wouldn't happen to have any spells that could tuck me in, would you?" Draco smirked, his heart feeling a little flutter in his chest as you pushed him slightly. All right, he said, his voice full of amusement. I'm going. Draco's smirk softened into a genuine smile as you bid him good night. "Good night," he replied, his tone softer than usual. He lingered for a moment, his gaze locked with yours, before reluctantly turning away. Draco quickly turned back and asked, "You wouldn't happen to need someone to stay with you during the night, considering you're so afraid of the dark?" Draco couldn't help but chuckle as you crossed your arms and shook your head, amused by his question. "What can I say? I'm just a bit protective." He smiled warmly, his eyes shining with amusement. Fine. I'll get going. Good night, Princess," he said softly, the nickname slipping out effortlessly. As he turned away to walk off, but he quickly spun back around, unable to resist his playful side. "You know, I could always be available to keep you company if you get scared and change your mind," he said, his tone sly. As you laughed, Draco chuckled and shook his head, the sound of your laughter filling his ears. "Good night," he said, reluctantly watching as you opened the door to the girls' dormitory. He hesitated for a moment, as if contemplating something, before finally turning away and walking off, his heart heavy with a strange mix of feelings he couldn't quite make sense of.